United Lutheran Seminary presents the Seminary Explores podcast, conversations on faith, art, people, politics, theology, life, and more, with voices from around the corner and around the globe.
How can we ease the gridlock in Congress? Hello, I'm Jerry Christensen for the Seminary Explorers, and our guest is Mr. Leon Reed, who is a retired congressional aide and since leaving that post a few years ago, was a defense consultant and then became a teacher and an author, most notably a forthcoming book on a combat engineer with Patton's Army to be released by Savas Beatty Publishers. Be sure to look for it, I hope, by spring. How can we restore or at least ease the gridlock in Congress, Leon?
Well, there are a number of ideas. First, it is important to understand we're not talking, peace, love, and happiness. We're not expecting that suddenly the parties will agree on everything. There are big differences between the parties. The party bases encourage their representatives often to, dig in and not compromise. So it is a partisan institution. But there are some ideas that could at least help in small ways to perhaps lower the temperature. I'm more encouraged about this in the House just because Mitch McConnell's been leading the Senate for some time, and it's less likely he'll change his ways. Nancy Pelosi, we can at least hope. One important step she could take is simply returns much more of the power back to committee chairs. The House of Representatives has, I think, 16 committees, agriculture, armed services, etc. For about the last 20, 25 years, the committee chairs have had relatively little power. Most decisions are made by the leadership. You see, instead of committees holding hearings and passing legislation and sending it to the floor, you see much legislation now that they vote on was drafted the night before by a group of 5 people behind closed doors, and nobody's had a chance to read it even. And usually the minority party has had no participation. Most notoriously, of course, the various Affordable Care Act repeal efforts and the tax bill.
I was going to say the recent tax bill.
Right.
Yeah.
Both of those were there. The Democrats were not invited or allowed to participate. It was simply a take it or leave it. We think we can get enough Republican votes to pass the bill. Obviously, that's going to create anger and frustration. Simply having the committee chairs doing the business of the public, holding hearings, inviting witnesses, all by itself should, in small ways, improve the communication between the two sides.
Because there's a certain procedure that if committees are well handled, if they're not done by the big boy network, there is a certain kind of exposure to the public and to one another.
Yes.
It's a longish process.
Yes, there's a hearing,
yeah.
And if that's a topic of enough interest, it's always on C-SPAN, but the networks might cover it. Those hearings on major legislation can be quite prolonged. Then they consider the bill, they report it, and if it's important enough legislation, the old way it used to work, they would schedule time on the floor, have a debate, and have a vote. Anybody who was a sensible legislator, again, back in the days that the legislative process functioned, would understand you're not going to pass a bill with strict party line votes. In the 6 years I worked on for the U.S. Senate, I do not believe there was a single strictly party line vote in that entire time. You go get co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. This is another thing. If they simply said, if you want to have your legislation considered by the committee, you need to make a good faith effort to get co-sponsors from the other side of the aisle. Obviously, if you try and don't succeed, they'd have to allow the bill. But this doesn't mean you write your bill and then go ask a buddy on the other side of the aisle to co-sponsor it. More the idea is you have a bipartisan small group draft the legislation so that you're the lead sponsor. It's mainly going to be your ideas, but if someone from the other side of the aisle has different ideas, you might incorporate some of them. It gets the two sides talking. It makes for more moderate, more inclusive proposals. And if the legislative body is functioning, proposals that are easier for the House or the Senate, if they decided to do the same thing, to actually consider them and process them. If you're going to have, the Senate has been very closely divided and will be almost as closely divided next year. If you'd start out knowing you don't want Democratic votes, we saw this most notably in healthcare. Yeah. You lose Susan Collins, suddenly what John McCain decides to do is the only thing that matters. Yeah. If you wrote a bill in such a way that 6 Democrats are supporting it, the desperate need to hold on to every Republican vote isn't as evident. And a couple of, Rand Paul, if he perceives it spends too much money, or whoever, it's fine if they vote against it.
Let's do, before we go on to one or two more suggestions, let's do a little history. Leon, you were a congressional aide appointed by the late, great William Proxmire?
Yes,
right?
William Proxmire.
Those were the days.
The father of the Golden Fleece Award, which thankfully I managed to avoid involvement with. It was humorous, but I don't think anybody thought very serious. It did make a point.
Yeah.
Proxmire was a great boss to work for. He wasn't the kind of guy who would have the staff over to picnics and play football in the backyard. He was strictly business, but a very good man. I thought one of the best members of the Senate. I worked for him just about one Senate term, most of the Ford administration and all of Carter. I worked on the Senate Banking Committee. That was the committee he chaired at that time. And we worked on some fairly important legislation. At that time, the notion that every bill automatically to be considered requires 60 votes was unthinkable. I mean, it's not that it was the notion that as a delaying device we would on this bill require the other side to get 60 votes simply was unthinkable. The idea was we're here to do the public business. If bills clear committee, they deserve an up or down vote. If you don't like the bill, I must have heard this from my staff director 20 times. Just propose some rifle shot amendments. Let's get the up and down vote, and if we lose, we'll move on.
Okay.
It wasn't, the Battle of Verdun style, combat to the death.
All or nothing. When did all that change? I don't want to say you were living in a golden age, but
actually, a friend of mine who was on the Hill at the same time wrote a book called The Last Great Senate.
Oh, okay.
Which was about the period that more or less ended a few years after both of us left. It really was, in the sense that the consensus was we're here to do the public business. One of the big events that led to the gridlock now was 1994 election, when Newt Gingrich brought in the first Republican-controlled House in a generation, really. It probably was time for a partisan change. The Democrats probably had run the House for too long. Republicans would probably say the Democrats did it first, but Gingrich was the guy who emasculated the committee chairs, who consolidated all the authority with the leadership. He began to do really putting up things that would force Democrats to make embarrassing votes that they could then hammer them in the next election. That was a big step in the beginning of the gridlock. His successor, Dennis Hastert, and another of the ideas that would improve things in the House, the Hastert rule was there can be a bill. Immigration reform would be a good example in the present day. There can be a bill that would easily pass with much support from the minority party and some, but not universal support from the majority. Hastert's rule was if it doesn't have the support of the majority of the Republican caucus, it doesn't go to the floor at all. This was what's prevented any votes in the last 8 years on immigration reform, which would easily, the immigration reform bills that, would fix DACA, ease off of the pressure on illegals without amnesty, more ID requirement, the moderate proposals would easily pass both houses of Congress if they came up for a vote. But they'll never come up for a vote as long as the Hastert rule is in effect.
We're talking to Mr. Leon Reed, who is a retired congressional aide, a defense consultant, an author, and a teacher, about how to ease the gridlock in Congress. I'm your host today, Jerry Christensen, and we're happy you joined us. We've kind of touched on restoring the power to the chairs, so that the big boys, and literally usually they are boys, the big boys, don't have complete control, and legislation by regular process. In what way could we include the minority in the procedural process?
Again, I don't want to be overly tiresome about those were the good old days, but in the days the House and Senate functioned as legislative bodies, there were certain procedural things. It just was taken for granted that these are collegial activities. Obviously, we're the majority party. We want to win. But when we vote to issue a subpoena, it's a committee vote. We have more votes. We're gonna get the subpoena. But we don't just have the chairman sign a bunch and not even tell the minority party we issued them. Again, something that would have been unthinkable, the committee I worked for did several investigations that were somewhat controversial. One was on national bank chartering policy. Sounds like a dry subject, but it isn't. The Republicans disagreed with everything we said. They knew we kept them in the loop, but they simply saw it differently. It no more would have occurred to us to publish unilaterally a report just with our words than it would have occurred to us to try to swim to Europe. It was just simply understood that a committee report has the views of the committee majority and of anybody on the committee, group or single person, who has anything else to say. Some of them agree but don't think it goes far enough, so those are additional thoughts. Some of them totally disagree. We saw this most prominently in the opposite of this, the bad practice with the House Intelligence Committee, where Congressman Nunez would issue subpoenas, have his staff interview witnesses, write and issue reports, not only without letting the Democrats participate, but not even telling them they were doing it. That just, it's no way to run a railroad. It's going to leave bitterness and anger on the side of the minority, no matter how right, the majority is, even if the minority doesn't disagree that much. Just, you left us out of it, it's not right. So just procedurally, having the minority party involved, you still want to win. This is a partisan body.
Yeah.
I remember Robert Byrd was the Senate Majority Leader when I was there. When major legislation was going to the floor, he would have a breakfast meeting. There might be 40 people there. A few senators, mostly staff, but every committee that had an interest, both sides. There might be 3 people from the majority party and only 1 from the minority. Just talking when we're going to bring the bill up, what kind of amendments are going to be allowed, who's going to be the floor leader, how much time are we going to allot to the bill, and it was an open discussion. And again, if we ever had sort of I see it a different way, the majority leader's the one who's going to decide, but he allowed the Republicans to participate in the process. With effective leadership, you're still going to get your way a high percentage of the time. And in fact, it makes it easier to legislate. You don't have to get 100%. If you have a little bipartisan support, you don't have to get 100% of your caucus.
You might even, you have more effective legislation if you included members of the minority on either side, because you might get more done. If before the vote came up, you actually reached across the aisle and said, okay, I know we differ, but there are a couple of things we can put in there that might be, and you've been talking about, that's kind of how you did it.
That was just how you legislated back then. Now, Obama did this with the stimulus. The Republicans had decided we're going to do 100% obstruction, but so we're not going to participate. But when he did his stimulus, he wanted spending.
Yeah. He
made much of the stimulus tax cuts hoping it would appeal to Republicans. It didn't work.
Okay.
Healthcare was the same. He basically took a Republican idea from the Heritage Foundation and fleshed it out. But again, a lot of Democrats would have preferred single-payer Medicare for all. Obama said, I'm going to do something to try. Both sides have to be willing to party for this to work.
So there's an element of good faith effort on both sides.
But the hope is, once you get talking, things like eating lunch together in the cafeteria, that silly congressional softball game they play every year, sharing rides in the Senate subway just getting to know your opposite number. It's a lot harder to view someone as the devil incarnate. If he was the guy who hit the double that brought you in from second base, suddenly he's on the baseball team, your teammate and ally. And just getting the talking started, lowering some of the barriers. Again, they're still going to be highly partisan, but you hope it can begin to lower the temperature a little bit.
You would assume that in many bills there are things that both sides would like to have. But in the current atmosphere, it's a win or lose situation.
Yes.
And so chances are nobody wins. And that's been your point about gridlock. Did we include enough of the minority procedural elements to your satisfaction? To try to get the minority guaranteed that they would have some kind of input, and therefore a greater majority would probably vote for a bill.
Even if they don't, if Adam Schiff continues with some sort of Russia investigation, it's highly likely by the end of that investigation, every Republican on his committee will vote against it. But if he has allowed their staff to participate in the interviews, allowed the members to be fully aware what's going on. They may still be totally opposed to the result, but they're not likely to be as cosmically angry as Adam Schiff and the other Democratic members were when Representative Nunes was simply writing reports behind closed doors and issuing them unilaterally.
What we should do then, Leon, is to look very carefully in the next weeks and months to see how Nancy Pelosi and the leadership of the new majority in Congress responds to some of these suggestions, keeping in mind that there's still the Senate on the other side, and that's going to, and a president who is also of a different party. It's going to be interesting to see if any of this progress
It's going to be
made.
difficult to get much legislation to the president's desk.
Right.
You hope that we can begin to make some small steps to make the House work better. Mm-hmm. The House and the Senate have always been totally, we Senate staffers looked at the House sort of like,
right.
I forget the fraternity, but the blonde-haired ROTC guys looked at Delta House just as, sort of crazy, disorderly place.
Yeah.
But you would hope if the House begins to function that perhaps some of those lessons might be applied on the Senate side as well. If there's consensus legislation, that's a long way from being feasible now. But if Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi both walk into the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, this is legislation we both think is in the national interest, a lot of that legislation, I think the president will wind up putting his signature on and, doing his, holding it up and saying, look at my law. Because, he said it himself about health care. You noticed it wasn't Chuck and Nancy, it was Mitch and Nancy have to get together. And after the recent district court decision, Mitch and Nancy have to get together and give us a superior health care bill. Even President Trump recognizes a bipartisan world is a little different than when all he has to do is talk to Mitch and Paul Ryan.
How to ease the gridlock in Congress is our subject today, and our guest is Leon Reed, retired congressional aide. I'm Jerry Christensen for the Seminary Explorers. Have a very good day.
You have been listening to The Seminary Explorers, a production of United Lutheran Seminary with campuses in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We invite you to visit our website at unitedlutheranseminary.edu. Opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of United Lutheran Seminary or the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.